Gentlemen, it's a privilege to welcome you all for this session, which is the last session for today in Vagarth, which is Global Tumult, how India is navigating it. As the festival moves forward, we now turn to a session that addresses uncertainty, flux and realignments shaping the world today. We are honored to welcome Sujan R. Chinoy. A big round of applause. Director General of the Manohar Parrikar Institute for Defense Studies and Analysis, MPIDSA, New Delhi, a position he has held since 2019. A career diplomat from 1981 to 2018, Ambassador Chinoy has held several key assignments, including serving as India's ambassador to Japan. He is a recognized specialist on China, East Asia, and political, military, and security issues, and played an important role in anchoring confidence building measures related to India-China boundary negotiations between 1996 and 2000. He has also served on deputation to the National Security Council Secretariat, where his work covered external and internal security issues across the Indo-Pacific. His earlier diplomatic postings include serving as Consul General in Shanghai and Sydney, with extensive experience in trade, investment, and economic diplomacy. He was the chair of the Think 20 engagement group during India's G20 presidency and continues to contribute regularly to leading journals and newspapers. I welcome Ambassador Chinoy on the dais with a big round of applause. Joining him as a speaker is Shishir Priyadarshi, President, Global Relations, Adani Group. In his current role, he is responsible for facilitating the group's international outreach, shaping global strategy, and supporting new international projects. Earlier, he served as the director at the World Trade Organization in Geneva, becoming the first Indian civil servant to hold this position. With over 22 years of international experience, he brings deep expertise in international economic policy, trade regulations, infrastructure development, and global financial architecture, and has worked closely with institutions such as the World Bank, International Monetary Fund, UNCTAD, UNDP, and OECD. He has also assisted governments across Africa and Asia in economic and fiscal policy formulation, infrastructure planning, and access to international finance. I request Shishir Priyadarshi to please come up on the dais as we welcome him with a big round of applause. Prior to his international assignments, he spent over 2 decades as a senior Indian Administrative Service officer, working at both the state and central government levels, including in the Cabinet Secretariat, dealing with economic, finance, industrial, and infrastructure ministries. His work combines global policy experiences with strong grassroots administrative exposure. Moderating this important conversation is Manjeev Singh Puri, former ambassador and one of India's most experienced voices in multilateral diplomacy. Ambassador Puri has served as India's ambassador to the European Union and to Nepal, and earlier as ambassador to Belgium and Luxembourg. He was also India's ambassador and deputy permanent representative to the United Nations, with diplomatic postings in Germany, Thailand, Venezuela, South Africa, and Oman. I request Manjeev Singh Puri and welcome him with a big round of applause on the dais. His special areas of expertise include multilateralism, the United Nations system, climate change, and sustainable development. He served for several years as India's lead negotiator at global forums, including the UNFCCC conferences and the Rio 20 summit. He is currently a distinguished fellow at TERI, New Delhi, and an adjunct distinguished fellow at Gateway House, Mumbai. And before we begin this conversation, and also we are celebrating the Vishwa Hindi Divas today. महाभारत के शांति पर्व में भीष्म पितामह ने युधिष्ठिर को कूटनीति का एक सूत्र दिया था, उसे मैं याद करना चाहता हूं, दोहराना चाहता हूं। जो विश्वास के योग्य नहीं हैं उस पर कभी विश्वास ना करें, लेकिन जो विश्वास पात्र हैं उस पर भी आंख मूंद कर भरोसा ना करें, क्योंकि अत्यधिक विश्वास से उत्पन्न होने वाला भय इंसान की जड़ें काट देता है। With this, I request you all to please start this conversation. Thank you very much.
बहुत बहुत आपका धन्यवाद। मैं थोड़ा सा हिंदी में आपके लिए कह दूं, क्योंकि आपने कहा आज विश्व हिंदी दिवस है, तो आप सबको इसके लिए बहुत बहुत बधाई। और मुझे बहुत अच्छा लगा कि डिस्पाइट के वहाँ पर एक टेलीविजन शो चल रहा है सांत वाले हॉल में, उसको छोड़ के आप लोग यहाँ पर आ गए। तो मैं आपको इतना बता सकता हूँ कि उससे ज़्यादा हम इंटरेस्टिंग करेंगे। आप लोग जरूर जाएंगे इससे थोड़ा बहुत मज़ा करके। और मुझे पता है इसके बाद कुछ शो है, कुछ खाना वाना है, डिनर विनर है, और ये लोग कहते हैं डिनर से पहले तो शो करना ही नहीं चाहिए क्योंकि लोगों का मूड कहीं और होता है। लेकिन डोंट वरी, दिस शैल बी, जिसको कहते हैं थॉट इन प्लेस ऑफ द फूड दैट विल कम टू यू लेटर ऑन। थैंक यू वेरी मच फॉर दैट। आपने जो कहा, ये मेरा ख्याल रोनाल्ड रेगन को भी किसी ने यही बताया गया था, बिकॉज द फेमस सेइंग इज ट्रस्ट बट वेरीफाई, एंड दैट्स द वे इट गोज। सो वेयर शैल वी बिगिन? I want to just tell you, I am here actually as a payback for the session that Akbar and I did in the other room a few hours back. और ये मेरी दोस्ती है राघव जी के साथ, आपके सारे ऑर्गेनाइजर्स के साथ, के थोड़ा बहुत पेबैक भी करना पड़ता है, इसलिए आई एम वेरी हैप्पी टू एंकर दिस पर्टिकुलर सेशन। थैंक यू वेरी मच फॉर दैट। मैं आप लोगों को बताया, आपने इन सबका सीवी वगैरह सुना, लेकिन अब मैं ज़रा थोड़ा सा आपको थोड़े से संक्षिप्त में लेकिन विस्तार में ज़रा बताना चाहता हूँ। ये दो सिर्फ यहाँ पर ऐसे सिविल सर्वेंट हस्तियाँ नहीं बैठी हुई, दे अमंग इंडियाज मोस्ट एक्सपीरियंस्ड पीपल। Let me turn around to Shishir here. Yes, thank you. IAS for a quarter of the century. The World Trade Organization. हाँ, मुझे पता है कि आज लोग बहुत इधर उधर कह रहे हैं, लेकिन इनको शायद पता था कि WTO की हालत इतनी अच्छी नहीं होगी, उसको छोड़ के ये ISB में प्रोफेसर बन गए। उसके बाद to be the head of global relations for one of India's top corporate groups, and now being the president of the Chintan Research Foundation. Ladies and gentlemen, please put your hands together for perhaps India's most knowledgeable individual. Shishir in lots of areas, but certainly in the area of trade. और आज का माहौल क्या है बताएं आप लोग, क्या माहौल है, किस चीज का माहौल है? करेक्ट, तारीफ टैरिफ्स का माहौल है। ये अभी हम इनसे कई चीजों के बारे में पूछे। आई एम ऑल्सो वेरी डिलाइटेड टू हैव माई सीनियर कॉलीग एम्बेसडर सुजान चिनॉय है। आपने इनका पूरा सीवी तो पढ़ा, लेकिन अब मैं आपको एक बहुत इंटरेस्टिंग बात बताता हूँ। सुजान, प्लीज करेक्ट मी इफ आई एम रॉन्ग इन दिस। ये भारत में बहुत सारे हमारे डिप्लोमेट्स चाइनीज सिखाए जाते थे, नेचुरली 1962 के बाद ये बहुत इंपॉर्टेंट होगा, लेकिन ये एक हैं जो सिर्फ हमने नहीं भेजा इनको चाइनीज सीखने के लिए, इनके पुरखों ने भेजा, तभी इनका नाम भी चिनॉय रखा हुआ है। तो आज का जो हमारा सेशन है वो है ऑन द ग्लोबल ट्यूमल्ट, इंडिया एज अ पोल स्टार। अब मैं आपको कुछ दिखाना चाहता हूँ। ये एक लिटरेचर फेस्टिवल है, कुछ सेशन आप ज़रूर कर सकते हैं, जैसे अकबर जी ने और मैंने कहा, जो आर्टिकल्स के बारे में सेशन हो रहे हैं, आज क्या हो रहा है टीवी डिबेट्स के बारे में बात, लेकिन ज़्यादातर सेशन कुछ किताब विताब पे होना चाहिए। आफ्टर ऑल लिटरेचर फेस्टिवल है। तो ये सुजान जी की किताब है, हम लोग इस पर बात करेंगे, लेकिन मेरा एफर्ट ये होगा कि आप लोग ज़रा बात करें, मैं नहीं ज़्यादा बात करूं। दोनों मेरे दोस्त हैं, कुछ और गुस्ताखी हो गई तो इसके बाद मुझे उसका ज़्यादा ही भुगतना पड़ जाएगा. आप लोग सवाल करिए, अपने सवाल रखिएगा अपने पास. So I want to tell you. So Sujan, I need to begin by asking you to talk about the book, but I want to tell you all something very interesting. This book was published in the year 2024. The book fundamentally, it speaks of a lot of things about the rise of India. India as a pole star, that's the subtitle. But it basically pegs itself on the successful hosting of the G20 presidency of India. Sujan was intimately involved. He was the chairperson of the Think 20 on behalf of India, and so on and so forth. But Sujan, a bit of a fresh question, if I may. In 2024, did you know that Donald Trump was going to get elected?
No,
And
I
then
think,
tell us about the book.
look, firstly, yeah, it's on. Thank you very much, Manjeev, for that very generous introduction. And it's great to be here with you and with Priyadarshi. Let me say that I'm here more than Manjeev to do Prachar Prasar for my book. And let me begin by stating that I read just yesterday a book by Osho. I think the title is Courage. And I don't know if this story is apocryphal, ये संदिग्ध कहानी है या सच्चाई में ऐसा हुआ था. But he says that Bernard Shaw, when he wrote his first book, he realized that A, he was unknown, and B, that his book was equally unknown. And so he decided to go to bookstores in disguise, different bookstores in different disguise, and ask the bookstore manager for his own book. And when the manager would say, "Who's Bernard Shaw?" And no, I haven't heard of that book. And he would then give him a lecture saying that you haven't heard of Bernard Shaw and you are not carrying this book? What kind of a bookstore are you? He would go out onto the streets of London and accost unsuspecting civilians, members of society, and say, have you read this latest book by Bernard Shaw? They would also say, who's Bernard Shaw? No, we haven't heard of this book either. And he would say, I didn't know that London really didn't have any great culture. I mean, I thought London would be more cultured than this. So it is probably an apocryphal story, but my book is for real. The fact is that no one could have predicted Trump's coming onto the scene. In fact, in this book, I have spoken about the 7 T factors that are factors that have given rise to a lot of friction and conflict around the world. And let me read out to you these 7 T factors. That's trade, which has become increasingly weaponized; technology, which lends itself to even greater weaponization today, for it's not as fungible as trade, nor is it conducted by businessmen. It's usually high-tech or governments, and private businesses that invest in that. Then there is territory, which is also a source of great tension. Terrorism, which ought to unite the world, but which still divides the world. Tenets, as in narratives, which divide the world. Transparency, which is lacking. And trust, which is non-existent today. But in fact, if I were to write this book today, I would have added the 8th T, which is the T of Trump. Because he and his arrival onto the global scene, in fact, is one of the biggest disruption factors for disruption. And primarily because the United States, under his watch, is no longer trying to resolve problems, but as someone put it, the US simply overwhelms any problem that it encounters. And you're seeing some of that unilateralism not only in tariffs and in trade, but you're also seeing it on the military front. And I think essentially what I've tried to do in this book is to highlight India's strategic autonomy, which I think is extremely important. I think we have shown an ability to take independent decisions since independence, whether it was on the question of the war in the Korean Peninsula, when we decided to remain neutral, such that we were able to chair the Neutral Nations Repatriation Committee for POWs, or for that matter during the Cold War, the non-aligned movement. All those are attributes of our strategic autonomy. More so, the fact that we went in for a peaceful nuclear explosion in 1974. We wanted to use even the sanctions in the aftermath of that to become Atmanirbhar in missile technology. The 1998 nuclear tests, all that actually highlights our strategic autonomy. Now it's become very important today because there is a binary choice that has been offered for long. On the one hand, the United States of America, on the other hand, the rising hegemon, the People's Republic of China, and somehow we have always taken it for granted that we are to benefit from some, and we will be treating others as adversaries. The fact of the matter is that it's a jungle out there today with the global situation in great flux, and you really cannot take any nations as permanent enemies or permanent friends, and I think therefore we need to keep that in mind when we are dealing with both the People's Republic of China and the United States. In brief, I could expand if you want me to, but I've tried to cover in this book relations with all these countries. Also, a bit about India's rise, the emphasis on our sovereignty, territorial integrity, Taiwan, the Indo-Pacific, and what is expected of us in the Quad or in the Taiwan Strait, and so on and so forth. But I'll stop here to give you a chance to probe issues further.
No, Sujan, we will certainly take you on lots of these. But continuing on this T word, ek Trump to ho gaya, tumult. But let's take the T word that all of you mentioned, tariffs. So what should I say? We have Mr. Cuts sitting amongst us. Pradeep Mehta, please get up, say hello to everyone. The gentleman who founded an organization called Cuts. I don't know what he has to say about somebody saying I'm going to make it 500%. कोई बताइए अब cuts का क्या इसका मतलब है? Shishir, as somebody who's worked inside the system, and the fact that you also represented the government of India, without going into the theory of tariffs, the economics behind it, but the politics of it, the WTO, in a sense, defanged from Trump 1.0. Much of multilateralism that we see defanged, कल से हम बात कर रहे हैं 66 ऑर्गेनाइजेशन को छोड़ रहा है, लेकिन WTO को तो उन्होंने 1.0 से डिफाइन किया था और बाइडेन एडमिनिस्ट्रेशन ने भी उसको नहीं खड़ा किया. And therefore, Shishir, I want to ask you, what is your take on this simple thing that, while we look at trade and the flag as two different facets, essentially they are two sides of the same coin. What do you have to say about what's been going on? And is really the rise of China resulting in this tumult without others talking about it and referring to several T words?
Manjeev, बहुत बहुत धन्यवाद. The danger of having a very dear friend as a moderator and a senior as a colleague whose book we are discussing is that the friend has the right to make you feel embarrassed. So I genuinely felt so when Manjeev was telling me, ऐसा कुछ नहीं जी, it's like a cricket innings which is now into its fourth round, which should have finished long ago. But जो मैंने आज इनके बारे में, मित्र तो बहुत दिनों से, लेकिन इतनी अच्छी हिंदी बोलते हैं, ये आज मुझे पता चला है. It's outstanding. And thank you to our compare that you know जो शब्द आपने कहे. But एक शब्द मैं चिनॉय जी के लिए कहूँगा before answering your question. इन्होंने किताब जैसा आपने कहा 2024 में ये प्रकाशित हुई. स्वाभाविक था कि तब तक ट्रम्प and all the uncertainties were not there. तो अगर मैं या मेरा नाम प्रियदर्शी है तो वास्तव में दूरदर्शी ये है, क्योंकि वास्तव में इन्होंने yes, he deserves a round of applause. But अगर आज मैं आपके प्रश्न का उत्तर दूं, तो I want to preface my answer by saying that we are now in a situation globally when you have to, no matter what you think or discuss or talk, keep three things in mind. One of which Manjeev has already said about the weaponization of trade and tariff, and we'll certainly, that's what I'll answer on. But if you take the whole context, any country like ours, there is not only this weaponization of tariffs, there is a huge pressure on the strategic autonomy path that we follow, which Ambassador Chinoy just mentioned. There's going to be huge pressure. And you're going to be pushed to take binary choices. But the third, which perhaps is reflected in the kind of bill of 500% that was presented after President Trump's approval today, is the uncertainty related. No matter what we discuss today, tomorrow morning we could get up and you would find a completely new shock waiting for you. So if you look at any issue in the context of these three things, the first thing is very clear. That probably the toughest job today is that of our MEA officers, from the minister onwards. The most difficult job. I mean, how do you deal with a situation like this? But tariffs, perhaps, has become really, it's like this big hammer that the United States seems to have in its hands now. Because the first blow with that hammer was not tariffs. The first blow with that hammer was WTO. By completely blocking the appellate body, you completely blocked any kind of recourse to any resolution of a concern you have. And WTO was set up exactly for this reason. So as to prevent people, or countries, apologies, from increasing the tariff beyond the particular point. So you had bound rates, as they say, एक तरह की छत थी कि उसके ऊपर आप नहीं जा सकते थे. Yeah, absolutely. So उसका सबसे बड़ा जो फायदा countries ने, there was stability and predictability. But in one blow, genuinely in one blow, and perhaps I don't think any of the WTO members realized that the blocking of the appellate body would be a precursor to this kind of action that's been taken. Issue therefore becomes, Manjeev, what do you do? This is a reality. This is a reality. So what do you do to address this reality? There are two or three things which will happen. For many years, we would look at countries which would give you the cheapest product. That was simple. You looked at it, most competitive products, that's what you get. Today, you will look at the stability of the supply coming of that product. So it might be a little more expensive, but if you are going to get something, you will certainly look for it. The second, मुझे आपकी बात बहुत अच्छी लगी थी कि बहुत आपके reliable partner भी हों trade के संबंध में, लेकिन a complete reliance on a single country for a single product is something to be completely avoided, no matter it may be your closest ally. So I'll close, Manjeev, these opening remarks by saying that is it something that we'll be able to wish away? Absolutely not. Does it mean the death of the multilateral trading system symbolized by the WTO? Hopefully not. Though in a lighter way, and I must tell you, there are a number of very dear friends from Geneva who keep calling me to ask कि तुमने अपनी pension commute करा ली थी ना? So I keep saying हाँ करा ली थी. So things are tough, but I do feel that we will be able to tide over this. Sir. नहीं सर, मैं तो प्रियदर्शी हूँ.
Well said, Shishir. Very well said. Doordarshi inko kha. So, welcome Ashok Lavasa, former election commissioner and vice president of the Asian Development Bank. I'm also delighted to see, Akbar, that you're still around, and Gautam Mukhopadhyay to ambassador. This hall is kind of full of people like us. So, question even people within the hall. Shishir, I'll come back to you on this multilateralism. I just want to leave people with one thought. Mr. Trump likes the UN. When he addressed them for 90 minutes, when you have a 12-minute slot, his basic grouse was they did not give him the renovation contract for fixing the building because he's the best real estate agent there. And they didn't know how to differentiate between marble and some other macite or whatever other material is. He likes the UN. But he wants to use it to be exactly why it is in New York and why the World Bank and IMF are in Washington, i.e. Pax Americana for him means American power. Not just first do what the Americans want you to do. And that's being challenged fundamentally for the first time since the Industrial Revolution, that the transatlantic is perhaps not the only point of fulcrum, and that is through the rise of China. I don't want to get into our feeling competitive and we are there or we are not there. All let's leave that out. The Chinese are a 12 or 13 trillion dollar economy. We're nowhere in that game and not there as yet. We will. We add to that particular weight. But Sujan, the question I want to ask you is exactly what Shishir referred to. This business of weaponization of trade, relations, etc. Now, from all accounts that we see, and you know, all of us have grown up, and in the last one, I think last session, somebody asked this question about China and the United States. Look, if Mr. Trump is wanting to do a deal with China, and that certainly doesn't look as if it's not going to happen. If that's what starts happening, then in some ways, you could have for the world multilateralism, except for two things. The G2 this time will not be the USA and the USSR. And another thing, that the two might just be one. For long years, it was a G2, but the Russians or the USSR was no match for the US. You might just have that the two this time is actually one because the Chinese may be a larger economy than the United States. What does this mean for the world and for us? And I ask you this, Sujan, because China is your area of study and understanding.
So let me put it this way, that the whole notion of spheres of influence or a G2 or more than a G2, but basically a limited number of countries deciding the fate of the world is not new in American thinking. And Trump is not the first to speak about that, because you had Franklin Roosevelt talk about it way back in 1941 when they were still toying with the Atlantic Charter, which led to the, and segued into the UN Charter. And he was already speaking then of the 4 global policemen that would look after the post-World War II order. And by the way, China, poor as a church mouse then, a large agrarian country without nuclear weapons, was already part of that 4 global policemen's list, you know. But more relevantly for us, what we tend to forget is that the United Nations effectively has been bequeathed literally to the rest of us by the United States of America. It is the US that midwifed the UN Charter. It is the US that agreed that there will be a United Nations. And of course, there was a quid pro quo in terms of between Cairo and Yalta and all these meetings, that there will be a UN Security Council, there will be a privileged permanent membership. And so 8 decades later, what we see now is that Trump, representing a certain kind of opinion in the US, believes that the US has been shortchanged. The US's intrinsic powers of trade, technology, military power are immense. And if used unilaterally, they bring about the results that we are now seeing. None of the predecessors have abandoned multilateralism to the extent that Trump has. But if the US chooses to do that, it's actually quite easy for them to do it. And this is what they are doing by pulling out of multilateralism, because he wants to press the reset button on the terms of engagement of the United States with the rest of the world, friend or foe included, and it's ideology agnostic. In this, his first preference, as I see it, is to have absolute US domination. It is falling back to the Westphalian kind of notion of absolute sovereignty, territorial integrity, domination through military power, but of course, all in US interests. He is also adapting very cleverly to certain post-Westphalian characteristics which are part of the UN Charter, which says there is no such thing as absolute sovereignty. There is the responsibility to protect R2P. There is this business of multilateral treaties and their sanctity. There is this notion of people coming first above sovereignty. But when he is looking at that, he is only looking at it from the US angle. And so what he's trying to build today is what I would call a hierarchical sovereignty. He's respecting sovereignty, but it's a hierarchical sovereignty. And his first preference is to go it alone. If he can't do it, his second preference, way below the first preference, is to work with one or two strongmen. Right now, I see that list having just one strongman, as in, Xi Jinping. And that list, if expanded, might include one or two more. But this is where we are today. I personally believe, in a way, he has sounded the death knell, whether we like it or not, of multilateralism as we have known it for the past 80 years, and the United Nations as we have seen it, perhaps not so effective in its functioning, but it's the end of an era.
Sujan, thank you. It's a very important point that you made. Pax Americana, at least the way we know it, coming to an end. But मैं आपको अच्छे से छोटी सी कहानी सुनाता हूँ. It seems that the United Nations, United States of America, which is on the other side of the Pacific Ocean from China, and which has had, by the way, 200 years of relationship with China. We all forget it. The Chinese communities in the West Coast, US missionaries, they've given gifts to the Chinese always. इन्होंने आपको बात किया China, how did it become a permanent member of the Security Council? और सब चीजें छोड़िएगा. For the US, they were an important player, not for us guys, not for the Brits, no for no one else. But in some senses, it wasn't the four policemen. You got one of the other because it lends legitimacy. That it was what is now Taiwan, the Republic of China. You know, till 1971, they were sitting on the Security Council table. And then suddenly, they were told you shift away, even the nameplate was not changed. And the Beijing guys came and sat there. Life mein aise hi hota. So the US keeps giving gifts to the Chinese. और अब multilateralism खत्म होगी नहीं होगी ये मुझे पता नहीं. But ये ना हो कि एक और तोहफा Chinese को दे दिया to lead multilateralism in the world. Shishir, in this context मैं आपसे ये पूछना चाहता हूँ. भारत का role. You know, we have changed a lot. Incidentally, not many of you would know that in 1945 also, we were the largest country in the world. China was not the largest country. We were the largest country. After 1947, India was not the largest country in the world. But of course, we were a colony and the Brits wouldn't have allowed anything further to have happened. The Chinese were under their thumb, but they were nominally independent. So in this, Shishir, I want you to think about something, especially with your involvement in economics, working also with a huge, big conglomerate group in India. What do we need to do to retain, if not become the pole star, at least to be and continue to be an economy of consequence? Because we are the largest country, we are in various terms very big, fourth largest economy. We will become the third largest simply based on demography and globalization. But what do we do to strengthen that? And my question to you really is, हम लोग आत्मनिर्भर वगैरह के बारे में बात करते हैं और हम लोग बात करते हैं जो सुजान की और किताब is about strategic autonomy. इन सब को जो कहते हैं असल में teeth किस तरह हम दें? What do we do about it?
Tough question. I have no answer really. But I think one example that we can take, as Ambassador Chinoy was saying, and as was also talked about in the session with you and Ambassador Akbaruddin, China को definitely इस समय एक special status मिला हुआ है, right? I mean, the US and China can respond equally. They're treated well to some extent as a second equal partner. What can we learn from that, perhaps, and that might provide a bit of solution? China has a large number of issues which provide them leverage. You know, it could be your critical minerals, it could be a lot of supply sources, the entire supply chains in the United States being dependent on it. So in the ultimate analysis, we have to create a leverage for India. Now obviously that's far easier said than done. But that was the only thing which is going to give you some power. And you will have to find leverage which is acceptable and recognized. Now obviously, you know, आप हम सब लोग बैठे हैं अगर, you know, एक random survey भी लेंगे, so the only leverage we'll all probably come out or think about is our market power. You know, this huge market that we have. But that market power has continuously got to increase also. And that market power is of only can be used as a leverage, provided that market power is letting a lot of things come in. At the moment we have, very rightfully so, for many, many years between, struggle between self-sufficiency, import dependence, restriction of import. अगर वो करते रहेंगे तब वो leverage आप नहीं create कर पाएंगे. So it's a very fine line between opening up your markets and ensuring that the domestic industry is still not swamped, because this is this is where the balance will lie. But strategic market access can certainly be a trade-off for technology transfer, for some amount of kind of political stability, keeping in mind, genuinely keeping in mind, that we are heading towards a new definition of GVCs. Global value chains, हम लोग सब बात करते रहते हैं. The acronym will still be GVC, but now it's going to be geopolitical value chains. And if we can fit ourselves into that geopolitical value chains and create a leverage, I think that's probably one way forward.
Shishir, thank you very much. Let's open it up to all of you. Well, Sujan, go ahead.
I just wanted to add a little bit to this by saying that, the People's Republic of China has always benefited from the United States of America. Long before the People's Republic was, midwifed in 1949 through a civil war, you had, people like authors like Pearl Buck, then you had Ersa Vogel. All these people wrote with great sympathy about this one big, poor, agrarian Asian nation with a long history and culture. There was this romanticization of Chinese culture and the Chinese people, which stood, to the advantage of the Chinese. The second thing is that in the vain hope that sharing technology with them will actually wean them off communism and make them more like the United States, etc. That has been, a hope that's been dashed consistently as far as the US is concerned. While the Chinese continued to regard the Americans as enemy number one, right, beginning from the 1950s, Mao onwards, the United States continued to give technology and aid and assistance, and particularly, I'd say, during the Reagan period between 1983 and 1989, a lot of defense technologies were also given. So the Chinese have greatly benefited from the US. They've also tried to follow the US model, including what was otherwise called the Monroe Doctrine, now the Donroe Doctrine, but Asia for Asians, for example, or trying to limit the extent of US power on its periphery or broadly in Asia is one of the key objectives of China. It's also a kind of Chinese, Donroe or Monroe Doctrine. So they've copied the Americans. Now, we need to take a leaf out of somebody's book also, while we continue to do things the way we've always done these things. But we need to have some kind of control or say in critical supply chains. If we have a large enough market, we could use our market the way both the United States and China have used it to their advantage, great advantage. So if we get into that slot sooner rather than later, we might be able to leverage something more for our own national interests.
Perfect, Sujan. That's absolutely imperative. You need to learn also from someone else. And sometimes the book of the enemy is not a bad one. Yeah. We have the contributing editor of Business Standard here with us. Sir, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Ambassador. I want to add one dimension to what you said. Weaponization, I talk about and I'm writing about weaponization of everything. The most latest, we've seen weaponization of trade, as you mentioned, Shishir, weaponization of finance with SWIFT being withdrawn from Russia, and now the weaponization of digital and technology platforms, as you saw in the case of Naira Energy, and just a reminder to everybody that Microsoft and SAP shut off the systems of Naira Energy overnight because they used their trade with Russia as a trigger to sanction them. Today, tech platforms can switch off individually, all of us, from Google, WhatsApp, everything, if they decide to do so under mandate of their own government. So we are living in an era where weaponization of everything is very, very critical, and tech platforms, which is huge dependence. And I think that US and Europe don't want to create another China out of India, so they'll do everything. But my question is really that Greenland can be very important for us. And actually, we should not be surprised about Trump, because he's just doing what Europeans have done all over, which is snatch and grab lands and control people, control kings and change emperors and prime ministers. So Trump is finally doing to Europe what Europe has been doing to the world for centuries. So I'm actually happy. So I think that if Trump goes ahead with Greenland, the fracture of the West would be far more finite. And I think, and Shishi, you wrote about that, it will be an opportunity for us. I think India, and I call us the growth economies versus the legacy economies. It's an opportunity. We should celebrate it. The tumult is always good for the people who are growing. And I'd like your views on that.
Yeah, let me just say this. There is an old theory which says that unless there is, and Akbar, please correct me if I'm wrong, that unless there's a global tumult, the horseshoe table won't open up. We should welcome Greenland's being taken over. That's a good thought. I like that. Shishir, you will attempt to answer that. Then we'll open it up to everyone else because I think about 10-15 minutes more to go. Short questions. Next time, BLF will invite you to be on the table. But short question.
Look, thanks so much. Tumult, as you rightly said, is churn. And churn, if we go back in our mythology, did throw up amazing stuff, the positive and the negative. As long as you are prepared, and this is something we used to tell very, very strongly with a lot of belief to developing countries when they were opening up the markets when they joined the WTO, that there would be opportunities, but there would be challenges. Similarly, this tumult is going to throw up a lot of challenges. If we are prepared to address those challenges, then I'm sure the opportunities too exist. I'll keep the answer short.
No, Shishir, very well said.
Could
Sir,
I answer his question?
Yeah, please go ahead.
Yeah, okay. Just very briefly, I think in a way Trump is adding to the global tumult, and no one would disagree with that. There's no gainsaying that fact. But the point here is that there are two worlds today. One is the normative order, and the other is the empirical order. Now, global orders as we know them, the past 80 years, these orders are neither created nor dismantled easily. You require global wars, or you require apocalyptic events to bring down a global order and to create from those ashes a new order. Now, that's not something anyone wants. So I think the space that Trump is indirectly, unknowingly providing to countries like India is that there is an empirical space outside the normative order where a certain amount of unilateralism is evident on the part of the US. But that's the empirical space in which India is also growing right now, with or without a seat at the high table. And that is never going to open up. The UN is never going to reform. The 5 permanent members in perpetuity will enjoy their privileged powers, and they're not going to do it for the milk of human kindness. And even if you take the UNGA route, you require 2/3 majority and all 5 permanent members have to be on board. They will never be on board. So we have to actually work outside the normative order. Trump is giving us an opportunity afresh. It sounds a little pejorative to say that from our point of view, because we stand for a values-based future and all that. But we should take this opportunity to make our mark in the empirical order, not worry too much about the normative order.
Thank you, Sujan. I must say, it's really fantastic. We are finding here good reasons to say that Greenland should be taken over. I don't know what else to say. And good reasons that Mr. Trump should be applauded. Excellent. Look, these are open house debates. Delighted to welcome former Minister of the Union Council of Ministers, Mr. K.J. Alphonse, in our midst. Thank you very much, sir, for being here. Sir, you have the floor.
Thank you, sir, for giving me this opportunity. My name is Upendra Verma. With the increasing marginalization of India, I mean the recent developments, Bangladesh development, and then Mr. Trump is there, and then US and Pakistan relationship. Is there any, I mean, I would call it a flight, almost a flight of fancy, but I would request you to tell me, is there any possibility that this could happen?
What would happen?
What I'm thinking of is, look, we have to make compromises. We have to be very realistic that we don't have many bargaining chips with us. So we have to be realistic. if we are willing to compromise with China, is there any possibility of China, Russia, and India coming together and taking on this West or Trump dominated thing?
Sir, no, good point, sir. You know, I think we're being signaled that it's time to move to some other kind of event. A very important question. This was exactly what I was wanting to know from Sujan, who's been working on it. Incidentally, India holds the BRICS chair this particular year. We'll be holding the BRICS summit. So, is this the possibility? Sujan, what do you have to say that? Very briefly.
So very briefly, I would say that that likelihood, to my mind, is a chimera. It's very unlikely that India and China can resolve all their problems and build trust to such a level that we can actually forge a strategic partnership that would be against somebody to fend off further pressure from some other direction. Most unlikely. Does that therefore mean that we cannot work with China on certain issues? I would say there is scope to work with them. So if you look at this cooperation and competition spectrum, where you have cooperation, competition, confrontation, conflict, and then combat, I don't think we need to go up to that level of conflict and combat with China. We can forge a reasonably good relationship with China somewhere between cooperation and competition, not even get as far as confrontation is concerned. And there are, I would say, reasons to believe that currently we are in the midst of a thaw, though many of our problems are of an enduring nature. I had the privilege of leading the Track 2 dialogue for India to mark the 75th anniversary. So there is scope, I believe, to also pick certain aspects of their developmental model to see how best we can use it to the Indian context. Now, it's not a zero-sum game. We should never allow third countries to direct our relations with any country. That's the main point I'm trying to make, strategic autonomy. No other capital should decide the pace of your thaw with either of these two adversaries, traditional adversaries that we have. So we should keep that in mind.
Sujan, thank you. We'll take 3 quick questions before anybody else turns around. Sir, look, can we take 5, but you all will just ask the question, please. Sir, you were the first. बताएं.
भारत को आर्थिक महाशक्ति बनने के लिए चाइना और भारत के बीच में किस तरीके के संबंध आवश्यक है?
उसका जवाब आपने अभी सुना थोड़ा सा.
लेकिन मैं ये चाहता हूँ कि और थोड़ा उस पर प्रकाश डालें. क्या दोस्ताना या शत्रुतापूर्ण संबंध एक अच्छा, मतलब इनमें से क्या बेटर हो सकता है इंडिया के लिए, और क्या इंडियन सिविल सोसाइटी अच्छा रोल
उसके लिए. Thank you very much, sir. Can you just give that microphone at the back? Yeah, no, you please go ahead.
So just mention about the leverage which India can have. In my opinion, financial leverage is one such element which can be explored. India has the highest real rate of return. It is around 6%. The nominal rate is 6.5%. Inflation is less than 1%. This could be one of the areas where India can draw strength. We had global indices for Indian bonds. So JP Morgan Sovereign Global Bond Index was one, and FTSE India Dedicated Fund is another. So
very good point. You know what happens is when there's a crisis, everybody runs to mummy, and that's the US dollar. Lady, you wanted to ask a question. Go ahead. No question? Yeah, please ask.
Good evening, sir. I just entered into the middle of this session, but I want to ask this question. I don't know I'm asking right or wrong, but this question is, in the era of reciprocal tariffs, how can India balance economic assertiveness with strategic partnerships?
Good question, important question. Sir, you wanted to ask a question. We're coming to you.
Good evening, sir. So my question is, recently Trump has came out of the International Solar Alliance Pact and also from the 65 other organizations. So So what do you think, sir? Like, is it a good time for India to alliance with the other countries and form their own groups regarding the certain philanthropic organizations and especially the climate change section, sir?
Excellent. Cuts.
Yeah, right.
Let's start with cuts.
No, I have a limited reflection on what Shishir spoke about. And it's a very important point which he made. And I think we are missing the bus.
Pradeep.
Sorry, a very important point which Shishir made. Fact is that we all have, India has to grow if we have to compete with any of these giants. It has to grow. It has to grow at least 8% per annum. And to do that, we require our trade seen very clearly. Now, everybody seems to be disappointed with the WTO. India itself is entering into about 18 free trade agreements. That only indicates that we have an appetite for open trade, and the fact is that exports are a way how to go ahead to address our poverty issue. Now, the issue is, what Shishi raised is something which is very important. We cannot talk about Atmanirbhar when I think Modi ji went Atma Swavlambi. We have to be self-reliant in the Swavlambi sense and not in the Atmanirbhar sense. And therefore, the kind of signal we are sending out to the world that we are not open for trade, that is something which I would just expect this audience to appreciate. Thank you.
No, thank you, Pradeep. It's been an old story, isn't it? Protectionism.
Yeah.
We perhaps haven't bought this theory that the openness of trade results in greater investments. But you know what? Let's not go into economics about all this. Guys, both of you have a minute each because this gentleman is being sent messages by people that wind up these guys.
Sure.
Shishir, you first.
Yes, it's better me than he has the last word.
Of course, because
चीन के साथ रिश्ता स्वाभाविक है कि हम सुधारना चाहेंगे, बट हमेशा ये ध्यान रखिए कि उसके लिए वो हमसे क्या चाहेंगे. केवल हमारे चाहने से नहीं होगा. They will certainly want their pound of flesh. और एक और चीज़ चीन वाले रिश्ते में बिल्कुल ध्यान में रखिए, उनको तो ये बहुत अच्छा लगेगा जब तक यूएस और इंडिया के रिश्तों में इस प्रकार की, it is to their benefit. Very quickly, sir. Pradeep, as always, your points very, very important. And I think it's important for me, as having been part of WTO for so long, to say कि जो WTO की आज स्थिति है उसमें हम लोग यूएस को ब्लेम कर रहे हैं, obviously मैं भारतीय हूँ इसलिए, but India also has had a role to play. We've actually played a very negative role. There were long periods when we could have actually strengthened it, we could have improved it, we could have ensured that if such a situation arose, it would be a strong WTO. But I think we also helped to, even today, we helped to weaken it. Final point, जो आपने reciprocal tariffs का किया था, and I'll stop on these 3 points. Reciprocal tariffs was absolutely fine जब तक कि WTO के वो principle, MFN principle valid था. पर वो MFN principle ही जब हमने खिड़की के बाहर और दरवाजे के बाहर not only फेंक दिया, not only did we throw it out of the window, but then we've shut the window. So I think we'll probably have to.
well said, Shishir.
I'll just make one broad, macroeconomic global point that Trump is putting so much pressure on countries around the world that the risk factor for international investment flows to other parts of the world has increased. In fact, many global companies may actually want to increase their investments in the United States, where they believe it might be safer than to go to other parts of the world where the risk of tariffs still looms over their heads like a Damocles' sword. So this is a point that we need to mull over. It might impact us in the next few years. Pradeep, we can discuss that a little later. As far as China is concerned, हमारी क्षेत्रीय अखंडता और संप्रभुता के ऊपर समझौता हम नहीं कर सकते हैं. इसको छोड़ के चीन के साथ अगर हम शांति का एक माहौल बना सकें और सीमा विवाद को एक तरफ रख सकें तो कोऑपरेशन करने का मौका है. ये भी समझने की ज़रूरत नहीं है, मानने की ज़रूरत नहीं है कि चीन ही हमारा दुश्मन है और दुश्मन नहीं है. पिछले 1 साल में आपने देख लिया है दुश्मन कहीं से भी पैदा हो सकता है और ये ज़रूरी नहीं है कि हमारा कोई परमानेंट दोस्त है. तो चीन के साथ हम संबंध सुधारेंगे, शांति का वातावरण बना के रखेंगे तो हमारी जो आर्थिक परिस्थिति है उसमें सुधार आ सकता है, क्योंकि आप असला गोला बारूद के ऊपर इतना खर्चा नहीं करोगे. अब शांति का वातावरण होगा तो आप इकोनॉमिक चीज़ों पे अपना ध्यान जो है वो केंद्रित कर सकोगे.
Thank you very much, Sujan. You know, hum log, through our life, we used to be told that one of our great disadvantages was to have been on the other side of the globe from the United States of America. Now I don't know what we have to say. Basic thing, the T word, and there are two of them, Mr. T across the Atlantic and global tumult, dark clouds, but take them as opportunities and see what you can make out of it. We weren't one of these fortunate grandfathered after the Second World War, but you have an opportunity. Remember this, you are now the world's largest country. You will become the fourth or the third largest economy. That you still have much to go in terms of per capita income is a different matter, but the world looks at what you are in the end. And so, correct, we are. That we've always been. But you know, all of these things add to the way perceptions are created. And in fact, the game on all of this is the game of perception. And that's important. So it's an opportunity in times of a great deal of a dark cloud. But let's keep looking out for the silver lining. And I think that's important. Thank you very much to all of you. BLF, bahut bahut dhanyawad. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
I think what the session offered a lot clarity on uncertainty that we all are facing, global uncertainty rather, which reminds us that India's engagement, am I audible? India's engagement with world is shaped by history, strategic patience, and deep understanding of global independence. This is, I don't think this mic is working properly. Well, with this, a strong round of applause for our ambassadors and Ambassador Manjeev Puri, Ambassador Chinoy, and Shishir Priyadarshi. To honor our distinguished guest, I would now like to invite Mr. Mehta, founding member of Society of Art and Culture and Environment, to kindly join us on stage to present a token of love from and our gratitude. A big round of applause for the speakers on the dais. This is a special BLF 2026 memento. Legendary Padma Shri artist Padma Shri Durga Bai created this artwork specifically for BLF. It depicts little Gorlaiya, a story of devotion. A tiny bird loved by Bhangsu is transformed by the tribal god Burra Dev into beautiful maiden, bringing joy to him and his struggling family. We'll have a quick photo op. A round of applause for this interesting and insightful session that was led by Manjeev Singh Puri. Thank you to our speakers, our moderators, and thank you, Bhopal, for being such an engaged and thoughtful audience. We look forward to welcoming you tomorrow in the last day of our Bhopal Literature Festival 2026. Thank you.